According to religion, there are certain beliefs, certain parts of theology which are not even debatable. Why? Well, maybe because they pose the greatest threat to the power system of the church. That's why when you even question it, you are immediately called a heretic. We have addressed many of these and will continue to do that moving forward. But today, we want to get into hell. Let me rephrase that. We want to talk about the myth of hell. Yes, beloved, it's a myth. The idea of hell is absolutely vital to the teaching of contempt, that fear used by religion to manipulate us, and people are terrorized. Today, we deconstruct this to free our hearts to love and be loved.
Would it be okay if I were to tell you that I am afraid someday, so I call you up and you call me down? Would it be okay?
Well, hello and welcome to the FreedHearts podcast. My name is Robert Cottrell and I'm 6'2" of pure lung.
What?
My voice. It was a nice, deep podcast voice.
It was. It just sounded like a
kind of weird, didn't it?
Like a mystery, yeah.
Well, we're going to start that way, aren't we?
Yes.
And I'm here, as always, with
Susan Cottrell.
I thought I'd shake it up just a little bit.
Okay. Well, it's fitting to the topic, I think.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I'm gonna push the boundaries.
Okay.
Here. So, welcome, beloved. Connect with us at freedhearts.org. It's the home of everything that we do. You can find our resources there and information on Susan's life coaching and all kinds of stuff right there. So, all right. Well, you got something? You look like you're poised. You're ready to go?
I'm ready.
Yeah. Well, here we go. Here we go.
Yeah.
You know, in the ways that we have been taught in the church, there are certain things, certain parts of theology that are not even debatable. Why? Why is something not even debatable? Well, because maybe they pose the greatest threat to the power system of the church, to the point that when you even question it, you are immediately called a heretic, backslider, and likely not even a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Of the devil.
Right. Wow. I mean, it's such a threat to the entire system. It's been said that those who hold the keys to heaven rule the world. And so they're damn committed to making sure that they hold the keys to heaven. And they do that in a number of ways, and we're going to address one of those big ways today. We've addressed some of those, and we'll continue to do that moving forward. Today, we want to get into hell.
That was all my screaming. That's all the screaming I had. Because you didn't really mean into hell.
No, we don't want to get into hell. We want to talk about hell. Well, let me be really clear. We want to talk about the myth.
Okay.
And I don't have it's not
myth?
The
Yes.
myth.
Okay.
Play, bugs. The myth. I'm really pushing the boundaries of hell. The idea of hell is absolutely vital to the teaching of contempt, us versus them, fear.
Yeah. That we've been talking about all this time.
Yeah, and people are terrorized by this. So we need to deconstruct this myth to free our hearts to love and be loved.
Yes.
First, there's only so much we can cover in this short podcast episode. But if you go to YouTube, and we may do additional episodes on this down the road to address
different aspects.
Different aspects.
Yeah.
But if you go to YouTube and search for FreedHearts, that's always one word, FreedHearts, you'll find our YouTube channel with dozens and dozens and dozens of videos, including an entire 7-part series that covers all of this in depth. So please do go find the FreedHearts YouTube channel. Please subscribe and look for that series on hell. It's called Hell No. Today, we just want to cover the highlights, what you've heard. We know you've heard them because we've heard them, and what turn out to be the myths about this false teaching of hell.
Yeah. Okay, now I want to toss something in there first about this. And I want to say that a lot of traditional denominations, Episcopalians, Methodists, I'm not saying specifically which ones because I'm not sure, but they don't teach hell. They teach that we all go to heaven. So this is more narrow than that, but it's a very big teaching. And you would think that when people get this kind of information, that maybe hell is not what we were taught it to be. You'd think the response would be, oh, I'm so relieved. My goodness, tell me more. You mean I don't have to try to believe in this horrifying eventuality of eternal conscious torment?
Yeah.
For people I know and love?
Yeah, perhaps the most disturbing thing about this concept of hell is how badly Christians want it to be real.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. I think that was our meme or something.
Yeah, it's a meme that's right.
Yes. Just, that's disturbing. But that,
yeah, but oh my gosh, really? Tell me more.
Exactly.
I want to be free from this fear.
But it's not the response, because those who are deeply conditioned into the idea of hell find themselves really reluctant, even in the face of evidence, to give up this belief because, what will it mean? What then? It's just really interesting. And Julie Ferwerda, in that book that I make available called Raising Hell, said something about this. She says, and you can get that book, just go to our website, freedhearts.org, and click on resources and then books, and you'll see it right there for free, and you can download it. She's made that available to us, which is very kind. Thank you, Julie. Okay, so here's what she said about her time when she was researching this book. She said, initially, we discovered a significant translation error of a Bible verse. This created a giant problem. For one thing, I had often gotten into big arguments with my husband, she said, when he occasionally questioned the inerrancy of the Bible. Repeating learned rhetoric, I insisted that God had sovereignly preserved the inerrancy of his word, despite the lengthy span of time and fallibility of countless human scribes and translators involved. But in this particular case, the translation error stuck out to us as plain as the emperor's naked butt. And our hope with this is to point out enough errors, give you enough cognitive dissonance to stick out as plain as the emperor's naked butt.
Well, that's a good goal. That's a good goal. So let's do this. There's several myths here. So we're going to do, I'll read the myth and you talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So myth number 1, hell is a set of biblical doctrine that the Bible teaches from start to finish. Wrong.
And we need to be hyper vigilant about this with modern versions of the Bible, because they added the word hell to replace words that don't mean hell. 3 words: Sheol, Hebrew for the place of the dead; Hades, Greek for Sheol, the place of the dead; and Gehenna, which is a literal burning dump outside Jerusalem, which Jesus began to use symbolically too. Now, for those of you who are terrified, who have maybe cried yourself to sleep at night, I know you're listening. We get your comments and emails. You did not cry yourself to sleep because you were afraid you'd go to the place of the dead, or which everybody goes to, or because you were afraid you'd go to a literal burning dump in Jerusalem. No, you're afraid that you're going to go to a fiery furnace torture chamber for all eternity. I mean, really, nothing could be scarier. I'd be terrified too if I believed in that. But the actual Bible in its original language does not say that. It doesn't support that. The very idea of a fiery, burning, eternal hell emerged between the times of the Old and New Testaments. So much for saying it's eternal. 2/3 of the Bible, the Jewish Bible, or what we call the Old Testament, doesn't mention hell at all. Sheol was the word translated as hell, but it only means the grave, or literally the place of the dead. But that's what a grave is. That's where everyone goes, right? Good or evil, Jew or Gentile.
That's what they believed.
That's what they believed. Right. So there's no concept of hell in the Old Testament. That's pretty significant,
Yeah, absolutely.
So
let's talk about the New Testament, which leads us into myth 2.
Okay.
Were you done with that? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So that leads us into myth number 2. Jesus taught that hell was real, and he spoke of it multiple times.
that's just wrong. These pastors will even say Jesus talked about hell more than anyone else in the Bible. Yeah, that's because nobody else talked about hell, because it isn't in there, because it isn't real. It has no basis in fact. And
Say that again. It has no
basis
in
fact. Yeah.
That's the truth, beloved. That's the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus warned about Gehenna, which is not hell, but was translated as hell.
Conveniently.
Yes.
And for specific power-grabbing control reasons.
Yeah. He spoke about it on 4 unique occasions.
About Gehenna
In Matthew. Okay? There are more in Mark and Luke, but they only repeat Matthew. And John doesn't mention Gehenna at all. Neither does Paul. There's one mention of Gehenna in James, it's not hell, but that's total 12 mentions of Gehenna, 0 of hell. Are you hearing this? If it were true, that if hell were true, then that would be a phenomenally irresponsible omission for God who, quote, takes care of the Bible and, quote, is willing that none should perish. It's a glaring omission for these entire Jewish people to have no concept of hell.
Wow.
To never be taught hell if it were true.
That's profound.
Right? Well, then what was Jesus talking about with this Gehenna? He was making a powerful metaphor to say, this is your fate, you who teach the way you do, excluding people that God wants you to include. You'll be thrown ignominiously, namelessly, into the grinding jaws of history, like the bodies of the nameless dead thrown into the fires of Gehenna. That's what he was saying. He spoke in powerful language, imagery to make his point. Because who is he talking about in these passages? That's always a good thing to ask. Who is he calling out? The gay boy? The lesbian? The trans women? No. The eunuchs we see written about in the Bible? No. Take a guess. You know this by now. Who's he calling out? The religious leaders, specifically the Pharisees. Those were the ones in his face in that day, who added the sort of brand new pagan belief in hell, just minted. That means it's not eternally true. They had kind of just blended that into their teachings. That's what happens in culture. Remember, the myth, the false teaching of hell, is necessary to the church to maintain control of the keys to heaven.
And that leads us right to myth number 3.
Yes.
Myth number 3, and we've already touched on this, is that the early church, well, not yet, but this is the early Christian church, the early church taught the doctrine of hell. Wrong. No, they didn't.
Okay, this is one of those parts of theology that we just assume because we were falsely taught or allowed to believe that the doctrine of hell has been around since the beginning. No, not true. The common belief of the early church was universalism, the restitution of all things. That was the common belief of the vast majority of early Christians. The Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, 2 foundational doctrinal statements for the early church, do not contain any concept of hell. If hell was real, it certainly would be a huge piece of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you have to wonder what happened. Why was at this time the doctrine of universalism was then replaced by the doctrine of hell.
Yeah.
You have to ask, who does that
Who did
benefit?
that? Why? Yes,
and
who does
why?
it
So
benefit?
those are things to think about. Those are red flags that go up that should send off
Who does it
alarms.
make in like stuck then under this authority?
And who does it give the keys to the heaven to?
Yes,
Yeah, that's right.
exactly.
That's right. All right, let's go on. Myth number 4. Myth number 4. The justice of God demands a place like hell where the sinner shall be eternally punished. Wrong.
Wrong. So think about this. If hell were real and you had the power to send people there, would you? Wouldn't you, if you could, deliver all people from hell?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of person?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of person would send somebody to eternal torment? That's, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Of course you would save them from that if you could. I would. And I know Hitler. People always bring Hitler up. Well, let's just say Hitler's a shoo-in. Let's just take Hitler off the table. Attila the Hun. I'll give you 50 people to exclude, no questions asked, okay? But just for argument's sake, even my enemies, and I have enemies, people who've really tried to hurt me, I could not send to eternal torture, and neither could you. So are we more loving than God? More kind than God? If God is, quote, willing that none should perish, then why would God have set it up so that hell is even a possibility? If all things were made by God for God and all things were made for God's pleasure, as we read, it is inconceivable that God would derive pleasure from seeing these children God created to suffer eternal conscious torment. Is that possible? No. It's people who derive pleasure from that.
It's almost like, a potato chip is good, but 6 bags of them after the 6th bag, it's like, you know what, this isn't working. I'd think, look at him down there suffering. But after, I don't know, 10 years, 20, 50 years of that, it's like, are you really going, this is getting a little old.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
It's just such a strange thing to base theology on that we live our lives out under. And here's another question. If hell were real and God really didn't want anybody to end up there, but was obligated, then why didn't God just kill Adam and Eve and stop the human race and this long chain of misery that sends people to hell? Right? If you've got an open balcony that overlooks a cliff and people keep falling to their death into the craggy sea below, wouldn't you close the door there? Come on, board that thing up. If hell were real and God loves God's enemies and tells us to love our enemies based on God's love, then what happens when God sends those enemies to hell? Will God not always love them? Does God change like that? We keep hearing that God doesn't change, but this is a change. If we're really meant to forgive our enemies 7 times 7, or 70 times 7, Jesus says, but God doesn't, are we more forgiving than God? Does this even make sense? This makes God completely transactional. Who wants that with your safest place? Do you want a partner who rewards you when you're acceptable and punishes you when you're not? No, you can't be safe there. But that's what this God is taught to us to be. Imagine a parent who lets you have dinner if you've behaved and doesn't when you don't. And we've known of parents like that, right? Sending you to bed without supper. But how stable can you be with that? That your sustenance, your life depends on your behavior.
How safe do you feel? How loved do you feel?
Yeah, in your safest place.
Yeah.
If how can you experience being unconditionally loved if your parents only conditionally provide the things?
Hang on. Wait, that's not unconditional love. I mean, that's the whole thing. If God loves you unconditionally, but there's this...
Right, that's what I'm saying.
It's not,
it's not unconditional love.
It's transactional.
Yeah, so it's transactional. and affection and safety and all those things, if you have to earn them or keep them, that's transactional.
Yeah.
And, it's like the meme you've seen of the kid in the corner of the class, the old black and white. He's got a dunce cap in his head because he made a mistake or did something, whatever, that the teacher didn't like. And that becomes his identity. He's a dunce now, and he's known as a dunce now. That's the point of it. It's like the beatings will continue until morale improves. That doesn't work that way.
Well, this is so convenient because if you believe that, if you're taught that, then the natural response, or unnatural, but the natural response is to go, oh, help me not go there.
Right.
And the church goes,
says, bam.
Oh, bam. Gotcha.
We're here. We gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with all of this, then we wonder why we don't feel warm and fuzzy with God, why we're so ambivalent. But why would we feel safe and secure and want to go to God in our troubles when we're not safe with God? We wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So it's just, and let me give you a verse right here. It's 1 John 4:18 that Christians, when you talk about this, will, like the hell-believing Christians, won't account for. But the verse is, there is no fear in love, but perfect love, which means full, complete love, drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made complete in love. The one who fears is not made complete in love. Like they're lacking this part of understanding because they're still afraid. They're afraid that they're not good enough. And that has to be filled and met. The fear has to be driven away, which it's driven away by God's complete love.
Yeah.
Okay, there's your answer right there.
And we may talk about this in the future, but and then another verse similar to that says that if you love, you know God, and if you don't love, you don't know God, basically. And so, but what's love? Love of yourself. If you know the depth of God's love for you, then you know God. Then you can love. I mean, if you don't know that, if you don't know the depth of God's love for you, then yeah, I guess I could be sent to hell. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so
Yes.
this runs so deep.
Yes, and I like what you were saying, that if you know God's love, you don't know God's love in a vacuum. Oh yeah, I fully know God's love, but it's not for me. Then you don't know God's love.
Right.
If you don't know it for you, then you don't know it. And if you know it for you, there's no way that there's a hell that you could go to.
Right, because you know it for other people too.
Yes,
That's right.
well,
That's
you
right.
know it because that's the character of God's love.
That's right.
Is nobody goes to hell. There's no hell.
And this leads us right into myth number 5.
Yeah.
And this myth is that a God of love is compatible with the doctrine of hell. Wrong.
No, not happening. No way, never. There's no proper way to understand eternal torment except as eternal torment. No gift wrapping or marketing is going to make that palatable. Think about it. Doesn't any compassionate person say, it doesn't really make sense, but I don't know. That's how God set it up, right? No rational, compassionate person says, I'd have done the same thing. I think hell was the right move for God to make. No, we all cringe a little bit or a lot because hell is absolutely cringy, and it should be. Those who don't cringe, who say, well, that's just what people have coming to them, are not the people we want making these decisions, not people we want to hang out with. It's certainly not entrust our souls to, like Tertullian, who invented hell. Like I said, he appropriated it from a pagan concept and rebranded it for Christianity. This is a theologian who said he looked forward to looking down from people in heaven and laughing with glee, specifically theologians who disagreed with him. Anybody who laughs with glee about hell is someone you want to steer clear of. And then Augustine later acquired hell, made a merger, and made it a household word. And then Dante helped us out with those mental images of hell that we now have in our collective psyche, those aren't from the Bible at all. Wouldn't people want to know this? The Christian explanation about hell is that God does not send people to hell because God created us with free will, and we can either accept or reject God's gracious gift of salvation. So really, we send ourselves to hell by our God-given free will to reject God.
Yeah,
that's what they'll tell you.
There are some issues with that.
There's some major issues with that. So God, the creator of heaven and earth, created heaven and earth such that humans could, and in fact were most likely to, be so guilty that they would end up in eternal conscious torment as punishment. That would even be possible is a major flawed design. If you bought a phone and there were even a chance it would blow up in your face and burn you beyond recognition, it would be a flawed design. Even if the user pushed all the wrong buttons, the problem would be with the phone. In response, God's solution is the brutal human sacrifice of God's Son. And this sort of turns this into a pardon for only members of the species that hear about it and properly understand it and accept it, and then don't make any big mistakes after that. Is that the warranty here? You have free will to accept or reject the offer, but if the choice to reject is a choice for punishment and eternal conscious torment, then that's no good. God has literally made us an offer we can't refuse under threat of eternal torment. And it doesn't occur to us that maybe there's a problem in our understanding of this doctrine. We should be really questioning it completely.
And we've talked about but you can't, as we said at the beginning, when you even raise your hand about this, you are immediately branded a heretic, set aside, shunned. And so folks are even scared to ask the question.
Yes. So imagine that I piled my little children in the car, drove them to a cliff, got them out, and said, now don't go near the edge, or it will end in certain death. I know there's no railing, so you just stay near mommy. And then they tumble off the cliff. And then I said, well, Judge, it was their choice. And the judge says, no, you're the one guilty of terrible negligence / murder. Now, I don't care how you try to justify it. The unconditional love and grace of God is incompatible with any form of hell and eternal punishment. Completely. And I read something on a conservative website that sums it up for a lot of people and how they view hell. It said, the doctrine of hell is uncomfortable for most of us. However, our understanding of hell shapes our view of the gospel, God's holiness, and our depravity. Yes, it does. Exactly. It distorts it into something it's not, something ugly and horrible. It goes on. If we don't accept the reality of hell, we won't rightly understand the glory of the gospel. No, the opposite is true. If we don't understand the myth of hell, we won't understand God's ever-present goodness. What kind of split personality disorder parent could do such a horrible thing?
Yeah. I mean, if we don't understand the myth of hell, then we don't understand God's unconditional love.
Yeah.
And the ever-present glory of God's unconditional love.
Yes.
Which is the gospel.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's astoundingly good news.
Yeah.
Possibility of hell is
not good news.
Not good news.
Yeah. So, beloved, we thought about stopping right there, but we just can't. we got to keep going because we've heard this in comments and in emails. We have to go on, and I just want to have a little disclaimer here that this is going to rattle another quote set in stone theology that is just part of this false narrative. But we have to go on. We have to go there because when we talk about hell, people often say, well, If there's no hell, then why did Jesus have to die? So we're going there, and this leads us to the next myth. Myth number 6, Jesus had to die to save people from God's punishment in hell. Wrong.
Wrong. And that's always the next question. If hell is not real, then why did Jesus have to die? And I invite you to stay with us here. Just breathe and listen for your deeper knowing. Let that still small voice speak peace to your heart, because we know this can be a trigger from what we've been taught. Okay, so why did Jesus have to die? Well, one answer is everyone dies. While our true self, our spirit self in God, it continues. We took on this human form for a human experience, and the true self will continue long after our human forms are dust, which is always sooner than we think. This is true for every human being, including Jesus. But what they really mean is, why was Jesus crucified? I'll tell you why. He was crucified because he was a threat to the religious and political powers of his day. Period. It was not to satisfy some righteous judgment of God. Really, he was executed because he was a threat to the religious and political powers of his day. This happened to a lot of people over history, like Jesus, who spoke truth to power. They get eliminated. Well, if I don't need Jesus to get out of hell, then why would I be good? Why not just do whatever I want? Well, you can do whatever you want with or without Jesus. People do it every day. But why would you? If I know, without a doubt, God loves me without condition, it makes me want to be better, not worse. As Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller and famous atheist, as he said, I've killed as many people as I want, and that's 0. Same, Penn. I've killed as many people as I want, and it's 0. And this is where we get into the so-called fall of humanity, which is also a myth. I know I'm really going to some core things here. And we talked about that in episode 146, so feel free to listen or re-listen to that. But see, that's the thing you knew intuitively when you started this journey. Once you start taking pieces out of the worldview, it continues to fall apart. The structure falls apart. But don't you want that? If parts of your belief system are false, don't you want to know? Or do you want to duct tape it together? And many people choose that option because to really examine the worldview takes a lot of courage. But as whoever said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And we believe that the courageous move and the satisfying move is to let the parts that fall, and then let whatever is true stand.
That's really good. I mean, that's really good. And I want to say that we're proud of you. I mean, thanks for listening and keep listening. And I'm proud of you for being willing to have the courage to examine this and to go on this journey. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. So, and
many of your families are not, we know, and you kind of feel alone.
So we have to go then to, what do we do with Jesus now? If his death is not what we've been told, we focus on his life.
Yeah.
How did he treat people? And how does he inform how we want to treat people?
Yes. Yeah. And that's still available to us. I still talk to him. Mm-hmm. I also talk to my deceased mother, and I still hear answers. And
this is something too that I think that I want to stop and put in here is that, you know, enemies, detractors out there are going to say, well, you're not even Christian. Well, let's hang on for a minute there, because if Christian means following man-made traditions that have been labeled the religion of Christianity, no, we're not. And
become the modern Western Christianity that we...
Right, that we're talking about here? No, we're not.
Right.
If Christian means a lover and follower of Jesus and what he taught and stood for, and modeled? Yes, we are. Okay.
And who people were for the first 300 years after he was here.
Exactly.
That's what they were believed, was do what he told us to do. Do what he did.
Yeah. So,
okay.
All right. The final myth here that we need to cover on this is that, and this is a myth. The myth is that there is a God, and separation from this God is a real possibility. I mean, this all leads to that.
Right.
That you can be separated from God. That's possible. Well, no, that's wrong, and that's a myth.
Yeah. You're not separate from God, and you never were.
Say that again slower.
You are not separate from God, and you never were. It may startle us to know that because depending on what we've been taught, we may think we're separate from God, but we're not. How could we be? Didn't Paul say, in God we live and move and have our being? Yes. How could we have breath if we were for 1 second separated from our source of breath? We are part of God. You are part of God. And remember Psalm 139, when David says, I can never escape from your spirit. And this isn't a good way. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, you get the idea. Even there, your hand will guide me and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night. But even in darkness, I can't hide from you. This can sound menacing, but it's not. If we're not afraid of God, it's not menacing. It's meant to be a comfort. That God is always with us, part of us, team beloved. Yeah, that's...
Hashtag team beloved.
Yes, God, part of team beloved, yeah. This, by the way, comes just before that verse that's pulled out all the time that says, you knit me together in my mother's womb, which is taught as condemnation of any way you see yourself that doesn't line up with how they see you. But the authentic way to read this is, you aren't going anywhere that God's not with you. Phew, that's great, because God does not condemn me. God's my safest place. If God's not my safest place, it's for fear of punishment, because we didn't understand that full and complete love that God has for us.
Yeah, we feel we deserve that punishment in some way. That's right.
We've been taught that. Yeah. But the gospel is astoundingly good news. It's not kind of scary news. It's really good news that you are part of God and could be no other. How could you not be part of God? All of it is part of God. There's no separation, no gap, no chasm to cross or fix or build a bridge for. Jesus did not die on the cross to bridge the gap between you and God, because there is no gap to bridge. This is man, religious man, in his pursuit of power, leveraging himself, wedging himself, using a crowbar to create a space between humans and God so he can insert that himself into that space, part of holding the keys to heaven so that they could rule the world.
Wow, that's just profound right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're not going to let that happen.
No.
Are we? No. This is all part of freeing our hearts to love and be loved. They're monetizing you, and we're not going to let that happen. And religion's concept of God as separate from humankind is not just a minor error. It's a catastrophic lie that has caused immeasurable suffering in the world. Jesus certainly did not teach it. He taught that we are part of God and could be no other. That's why he got so mad at religious men who terrified people, telling them they were separate from God. What lie could be more damaging? Well, hell is what the separation lie is wrapped up in. That's the threat. That's why it's such a dangerous and deadly weapon. This only goes to show how inventive people can be when they feel threatened, when they feel their power is threatened by truth.
Beloved, breathe. Breathe.
I need to breathe.
All of us together. Understand, beloved, that any resistance that you may feel about any of this or all of this is based on false teachings, rooted and maintained by fear, by abject terror, by those who claim to hold the keys to heaven for their own interest. They are the ones, beloved, who are terrified by the thought of losing their power, and they do not hesitate to fill you with fear in order to maintain that power. Mm-hmm. But it makes, hear me now, hell makes no biblical sense. It makes no common sense. It makes no spiritual sense. And you don't have to be afraid. It's time to free ourselves from this fear once and for all. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Don't forget, we have this 7-part teaching on this at the FreedHearts YouTube channel that goes into this in great detail. Again, search YouTube for Susan Cottrell, FreedHearts. Again, that's always one word, FreedHearts. And you'll see the Hell No playlist. We love you. We love you. We love you. We love you. And thank you so much for joining us every week. You are loved as you are for who you are. Absolutely.
Thank you for your courage for taking this journey.
Yeah, we love you. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Would it be okay if I were to tell you that I am afraid someday? So I call you up and you call me down. Would it be okay?
You've been listening to the FreedHearts podcast. We have extensive resources and vibrant, inclusive community for you at freedhearts.org. Please just come say hello. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for the podcast, just email us at podcast@freedhearts.org. Audio engineering is provided by Luke Johnson. The music is provided by our daughter, Hannah Cottrell, who is Grammy nominated. You can find out more about her and her music at hannahcottrell.com. Please share, subscribe and follow on your favorite platform, and support us if you can. Thanks for listening.